Bulavanaka. This lecture will be about trying to understand how the Hillstrom diagram can tell us a bit about why building a dam on a large river can be detrimental to the people that live down on the river flats. So first of all, with the Hillstrom diagram, it's quite straightforward really when you think about it. It's just got the size of the particles from small to large across the bottom here, and across the top on the side here is the velocity, how fast the river's flowing, how fast the water's going. And you can see at the top here is fast and at the bottom is slow. So essentially what it's saying is if the water becomes fast, then it will erode, and it'll erode in a different way depending on the size of the particles. If the water slows down, then the water will transport the particles briefly, and then finally it'll deposit the particles onto the river bed or something like that. So we're able to see here how different sized particles need more energy to move around. For instance, if you're a large particle, then you need a very fast river to get you going and then to transport you, and then very quickly, if the river is reduced, those large particles like rocks for instance, they're going to deposit very fast into the river bed. Whereas a small particle here doesn't need very much energy to, say maybe here, doesn't need very much energy to get eroded, and then gets transported very easily. And then from the transport, then it gets deposited once the velocity slows right down. So this gives us a really good understanding about what might happen when you build a dam. So let's have a look at that. Well, first of all, a river shape will be like this pretty much. Up here is the mountains and the catchment, like this, and down here will be some sort of delta. In this case, for the River Nile, it's a very big delta. Well, what they're trying to do is build a dam. Now, Ethiopia lives up in this mountainous area here with some lower areas, and they want to build a dam that sits like this. And essentially, dam is just a wall, as you know. Its main job is to trap water, to store water. And so the water will get stored in behind the wall and gradually build up like this. So you get lots of water stored up here, and then some will come out of pipes and tumble down and make their way down the river as it did before. And here, the hydrodynamic people capture that energy and turn it in through turbines, turn it into electricity. And that's what Ethiopia is really keen on as well. But the problem is that this group of farmers down here, down the very bottom, and not just in the delta, but all along the river edge here, have been here for many, many thousands of years. And they base their entire agriculture on two things. The first is water, as most of you picked up. If you don't have water, you can't grow agriculture. It's pretty simple. And all around them is desert where there's no water. So the Nile is very, very important to them from a water point of view. But the second thing is almost more important, and that's the nutrients. So in previous years, they have these flood events that carry the sediments and dump the sediments over the bank of the river when it floods, over the bank, and the farms get a little layer of silt, and that silt allows them to grow very rich levels of agriculture crops. And without that, they would just have sand. And sand doesn't grow very good crops. So you really need this silt here to make it all work. And this is what the farmers are really worried about, is because the flow of the river previously would have been, you know, something like this over time. And sometimes you'd get floods, other times the flow would be very low, and the river would be shaped by this flow, because when the flows are really high, lots of, you know, a big flood, it picks up all the sediments and low, smaller objects and larger rocks and things like that, picks them all up and moves them down and puts them into the delta and also puts them onto the farms. And when it's dry, when it's low flows and the water energy is low, then a lot of the particles will settle on the riverbed. But unfortunately, when you build a dam, you stop this flow. So what happens is the flow now will be regulated, because they've got capacity here in the dam to turn it on, turn it off. So now the flow will be more like this. And so they won't get the big floods, and they won't get the droughts either, just as important. And so all this sediment now is going to start to build up into the dam area here, and not onto the farms. And the river is going to slowly silt up, because without the floods moving all the particles, both small and large, they're just going to settle into the riverbed and just basically stay there. And based on this water flow. That's not very good, because what happens is then when there is a bit of a flood and they have to release a bit of extra water because there's been a bit of extra rain, what happens is, of course, that water's got nowhere to go. The riverbed is full of sediment, and so the farms get badly flooded. Very damaging floods, whereas just small floods are actually kind of beneficial for the farmers. So there's two aspects here. First of all, the particles being transported, having a velocity that is regulated, means that the transport of sediment can't be used by the farmers, and the delta itself will eventually start to collapse. Because it's always sinking, and without the continual floods putting lots of sediment on top, it won't grow. And if it won't grow, it sinks and it will get smaller and smaller and start to fall apart. And it's the same for the farms that live on the side of the river here. Without the sediment, they'll have to artificially buy in the nutrients, you know, fertilizers, that sort of thing. And that's going to make it a bit tricky. So that's why the Egyptian farmers who are living down here are concerned about the dam, even though there's some electricity benefits for Egypt. It's not very good for the farmers. I hope that makes a bit of sense, and if you have any more questions, make sure you come and ask. Okay, Manaka.